Samuel Jackson pressed 2 fingers against the unconscious kid's neck, feeling the irregular pulse that threatened to stop any second. The blonde-haired young man lay on the cold laboratory floor, surrounded by scattered medicine bottles and a puddle of foamy saliva that Samuel recognized immediately. His Vietnam-trained hands moved by instinct, turning the body to its side while watching the pale skin take on a dangerous bluish tone. Same thing that killed Linda, he thought, his mind going back 3 years to when he found his daughter in the same state in their bathroom at home. But this time would be different. This time he'd made it in time. The laboratory's silence was broken only by the low hum of million-dollar medical equipment, brutally contrasting with the desperate simplicity of the moment. A black man in a blue uniform fighting to save a stranger's life. Samuel didn't know he was holding the son of Boston's most powerful man. Didn't know this choice would change everything. He only knew he wouldn't let another young person die while he could do something about it. What Samuel Jackson was about to discover in those next few minutes would change not only his life, but expose a secret that powerful multimillionaire families would kill to protect. The kid in his arms wasn't just another overdose victim. He was the key to an empire built on the deaths of thousands of young people like his own daughter Linda. While Samuel applied pressure to the boy's diaphragm, trying to dislodge something stuck in his throat, he had no idea he was saving the only heir to a $12 billion fortune, nor that the laboratory around him was the center of an operation that turned legal medicines into deadly drugs, sold on streets across the country. In a few minutes, when Dr. Edward Morrison arrived looking for his missing son, Samuel would find himself face to face with the man responsible for Linda's death, and the question that would echo through Harvard Medical School's hallways, "Who saved my son?" would trigger a series of events that would prove sometimes justice comes from the most unlikely hands. But first, Samuel needed to keep this kid alive long enough to discover the truth. 12 years before that night that would change everything, Samuel Jackson had made a promise at his wife Margaret's funeral. He would protect Linda from anything this world could throw at her. He had failed spectacularly. Now, at 58 years old, with shoulders curved by the weight of 2 devastating losses, Samuel carried a new promise: ensure that Maya, his 12-year-old granddaughter, had chances Linda never got. Every morning, after his night shift at Harvard Medical School, he prepared breakfast for Maya before she left for St. Agnes Private School, a school that consumed half his minimum wage salary, but kept the girl away from the dangerous streets of Roxbury, where Linda had found the drugs that killed her. Samuel worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and working as a cleaner at the medical school at night, saving every penny for Maya's future. His calloused fingers told stories of sacrifice. His aching back reminded him daily of the price of keeping a family functioning with dignity in a world that seemed to conspire against people like him. That particular Thursday, Samuel had arrived for his night shift carrying more than his usual backpack with sandwiches and coffee. Maya was studying for a math test that could guarantee her entry into the honors program, and Samuel carried in his chest the quiet pride of seeing the girl's intelligence blooming despite all adversities. During his 12 years cleaning Harvard Medical School's hallways, he had learned to be invisible, a ghost who kept the place running while brilliant minds worked to save lives. But his observant eyes had noticed patterns: irregular schedules of certain researchers, laboratories that remained lit after midnight, suspicious movement of controlled substances. Samuel had never interfered. It wasn't his place to question what happened in the labs. His job was to clean, lock doors, and maintain basic security. However, that night, as he passed by the 5th floor during his routine rounds, something was different. A light on in Dr. Morrison's private laboratory, a muffled sound that made his military training awaken. Samuel stopped in the hallway, not knowing he was seconds away from a decision that would change everything. Dr. Edward Morrison maintained Harvard Medical School's most restricted laboratory, a space where he developed exclusive research for his multimillionaire pharmaceutical company. Samuel had always avoided that area during his night rounds, instinctively knowing that his presence there could be misinterpreted. Morrison Pharmaceuticals was one of the country's largest pain medication producers, and Dr. Morrison had a reputation for being ruthless with employees who meddled where they weren't called. But that night, the sound coming from the laboratory was unmistakable. Someone in severe respiratory distress. Samuel knew that sound from Vietnam battlefields and, more recently, from the night he found Linda dying in their bathroom at home. Through the bulletproof glass window, he saw a young man of approximately 19 years old struggling on the floor, surrounded by knocked-over medicine bottles and scattered papers. Timothy Morrison. Samuel recognized the face from Boston Society newspaper photographs. Was clearly choking, his skin taking on the bluish coloration characteristic of asphyxiation. Samuel didn't hesitate. He forced the door with his emergency master key and ran toward the kid. Years of military training awakened automatically. Check pulse, clear airways, keep victim conscious. What Samuel didn't expect was to recognize the bottles scattered on the floor. The same label that had appeared in Linda's toxicology report 3 years earlier. Oxymorph X7, experimental, not FDA approved. The words on the bottles made Samuel's blood freeze while he worked to save Timothy. This was exactly the substance that had killed Linda, an experimental drug that had somehow reached Boston streets disguised as pain medication. Samuel applied the modified Heimlich maneuver he'd learned in the Army, combining abdominal pressure with specific positioning to dislodge objects stuck in the throat. Timothy had tried to swallow several pills at once during an anxiety crisis after a violent argument with his father about his growing addiction to opioids. The irony of the situation didn't escape Samuel. The son of the man who produced these drugs had almost died consuming his own family's product. With precise movements, Samuel managed to dislodge the pills from Timothy's throat, who immediately began coughing violently, expelling foamy saliva mixed with blood. "Breathe slow, kid," Samuel murmured, keeping Timothy in recovery position while checking his vital signs. The young man slowly opened his eyes, focusing on the unfamiliar face that had saved him. Who are you?" Timothy asked in a hoarse voice. Samuel looked around the laboratory, realizing for the first time the magnitude of what he had discovered. Equipment for pharmaceutical production, documents marked as confidential, and hundreds of bottles of the same medication that had destroyed his family. Timothy Morrison struggled to sit up, still dizzy from the effects of the partially absorbed pills, but conscious enough to realize he was in an extremely delicate situation. "You can't be here," he told Samuel, but without hostility. There was genuine gratitude in his voice. "My father, he's gonna freak out if he finds out someone saw this." Samuel helped Timothy stand up, noticing how the kid trembled, not just from the drug effects, but from genuine fear. "This laboratory, does your father produce these pills here?" Samuel asked, pointing to the bottles on the floor. Timothy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He says it's legitimate medical research, but I know these pills reach the streets. I've been using them for months." The confession hung in the air like an accusation. Samuel felt a mixture of anger and compassion. Anger at the system that had killed Linda. Compassion for the kid who was clearly being destroyed by his own father's empire. "These drugs killed my daughter," Samuel said calmly, watching the impact of the words on Timothy's face. The young man turned even paler. "I didn't know. I suspected, but—" At that moment, both heard the sound of quick footsteps echoing through the hallway. Dr. Morrison was coming, and Samuel needed to make a decision. Hide and pretend nothing happened, or face the man who had destroyed his family. Dr. Edward Morrison burst into the laboratory accompanied by 2 private security guards, his face showing a mixture of relief and terror at seeing Timothy alive, but conscious of a witness's presence. Morrison was a 62-year-old man, accustomed to controlling all variables in his life through power and money, but the scene before him represented his worst nightmare. His son had almost died using his own illegal products, and a common employee had discovered the entire operation. "Timothy, what the hell happened here?" Morrison shouted, running toward his son while his calculating eyes assessed Samuel. "Dad, this man saved me," Timothy replied, still holding Samuel's arm to balance himself. "I was choking on your pills and he knew exactly what to do." Morrison forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, then I must thank Mr. Samuel Jackson," he replied with a firm voice, not intimidated by the guard's presence. "Night cleaner for 12 years. Morrison nodded, but Samuel could see the gears working in the multimillionaire's mind, how to solve this problem without creating bigger ones. "Mr. Jackson, Timothy sometimes experiments with medications he finds here. I'm sure you understand this must remain confidential." Samuel looked directly into Morrison's eyes. "I understand perfectly, Dr. Morrison, especially considering that these same pills your son was using killed my daughter Linda 3 years ago." The silence that followed Samuel's revelation was deafening. Dr. Morrison felt the ground disappear beneath his feet when he realized he had encountered not just a random witness, but the father of one of his victims. Timothy looked between Samuel and his father, beginning to comprehend the true magnitude of the family's crimes. Linda Jackson, I remember that name, Timothy said slowly. She was on the victims list that you said were acceptable side effects. Morrison tried to silence his son with a murderous look, but Timothy continued, Dad, you told me they were just a few isolated cases, that the benefits outweighed the risks. But this man lost his daughter because of our drugs. Samuel remained firm despite the guards approaching. It wasn't just a few cases, kid. It was hundreds. Your company produces synthetic opioids disguised as pain medications and sells them both legally and on the black market. Morrison tried to regain control of the situation. Mr. Jackson, I believe there's a misunderstanding here. We produce medications that save lives. If your daughter had problems, I'm sorry, but no. Samuel interrupted, his voice loaded with years of repressed pain. It wasn't an accident. You knew exactly what these drugs did, and you kept producing them because money mattered more than lives. Timothy, still weak but determined, looked at his father with growing disgust. He's right, Dad. I heard your conversations. I know about the illegal tests, about the bribes, about everything. Morrison realized he had lost control of the situation when his own son turned against him. Desperate, he tried one last intimidation play. Mr. Jackson, I know you lost your daughter, and that's a tragedy. But think about your granddaughter. Maya, isn't it? 12 years old, student at St. Agnes. It would be terrible if something happened to her education, or her safety. The veiled threat made Samuel advance toward Morrison, but Timothy interposed himself between them. Don't you dare threaten his family, Timothy said, his voice gaining strength. After everything our products have done, after he saved my life. Morrison couldn't believe he was being challenged by his own son. Timothy, you don't understand the complexities of business. Sometimes there are necessary sacrifices for the greater good. Sacrifices? Samuel repeated, his voice trembling with contained rage. Linda was 26 years old. She was trying to get off drugs. She died alone in the bathroom while I was working here, cleaning the hallways of the medical school where you developed the poisons that killed her. Timothy pulled out a cell phone from his pocket. Dad, I have recordings of all your meetings about the illegal operation. I kept them as life insurance after you threatened to have me committed to silence me. Morrison turned pale when he realized he had been betrayed by his own blood. Timothy, you don't know what you're doing. This will destroy our family, our company. Our family is already destroyed, Timothy replied, and our company is a cartel. Samuel realized he had an unexpected ally in Timothy, but also understood he was dealing with a cornered and dangerous multimillionaire. Morrison looked at the guards and made an almost imperceptible signal. Samuel, with still sharp military instincts, caught the intention and positioned himself defensively. Dr. Morrison, before you do something stupid, you should know that Timothy isn't your only concern, Samuel said calmly. In recent months, I've documented strange patterns in this laboratory. Schedules, material movement, people coming and going. It's all written down and stored in a safe place. It was a partial lie. Samuel had observed suspicious activities but had never imagined the true extent of the operation. However, Morrison couldn't risk it. Timothy seized the moment. Dad, it's over. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but this ends tonight. Morrison looked around his secret empire crumbling, then at the son who had become his greatest enemy, and finally at the cleaner who represented all the families he had destroyed. What do you want? He asked, defeated. Samuel was direct. I want you to stop illegal production immediately. I want compensation for all victim families, and I want guarantees that Maya will have a protected future. Timothy added, and I want to cooperate with authorities to ensure this never happens again. Morrison knew he had no choice. The empire he had built on human suffering was finally crumbling, destroyed by a cleaner and his own son. 6 months after that night that changed everything, Samuel Jackson walked through the same Harvard Medical School hallways, but now as security and ethical protocol supervisor, a position created specifically for him as part of the cooperation agreement that Timothy had negotiated with federal authorities. Dr. Morrison had pleaded guilty to 47 criminal charges, including illegal production of controlled substances, drug trafficking disguised as legitimate medicine, bribery of public officials, and involuntary manslaughter. His 25-year sentence without possibility of parole sent shockwaves throughout the pharmaceutical industry. Morrison Pharmaceuticals had been completely restructured under federal supervision, with Timothy assuming control of the company under judicial guardianship, dedicating himself exclusively to legitimate research and victim compensation programs. Samuel now supervised all research protocols at the university, ensuring that no laboratory operated without total transparency. His unique experience, combining practical field knowledge, sharp observation developed through years of invisible work, and visceral understanding of the human consequences of scientific negligence, had made him the ideal person for that role. Maya, now 13 years old, had been accepted into the Morrison Foundation's full scholarship program, an organization established specifically to educate children of victims of illegal drugs. Samuel could finally sleep peacefully, knowing he had honored Linda's memory not through revenge, but through real justice. Timothy Morrison had become one of the most respected voices in the national movement against opioid addiction, using his personal experience and internal industry knowledge to expose predatory practices. Clean for 7 months and attending intensive therapy, he dedicated his mornings to testifying at congressional hearings and his afternoons to visiting rehabilitation centers, sharing his story of how he almost died consuming his own family's products. The unlikely friendship between Timothy and Samuel had developed into something close to a father-son relationship, with the young multimillionaire frequently visiting Samuel and Maya for simple dinners at the Roxbury apartment that Samuel could now easily afford. Maya had found in Timothy a protective older brother, someone who understood the weight of carrying complicated family legacies. Samuel watched with growing pride as Maya flourished academically, her natural intelligence finally having space to develop without the constant financial pressures that had defined her early years. The girl frequently talked about pursuing a career in medicine, inspired by the story of how her grandfather had saved a life and changed the world. During weekends, Samuel and Maya visited Linda's grave, where Samuel told his daughter about the changes her death had finally brought about. It wasn't enough consolation for the loss, but it was a purpose that gave meaning to the suffering. Samuel's life had transformed in ways he had never imagined possible during those dark years after Linda's death. His new salary as security supervisor allowed not only financial comfort, but also the possibility of dreaming again, about Maya's college education, about trips he had never been able to contemplate, about a retirement where he could watch his granddaughter grow without constant worries about money that had dominated his adult life. More important than financial security, however, was the sense of renewed purpose. Each day at his new job was an opportunity to protect other families from suffering what his had gone through. Samuel had developed rigorous protocols for pharmaceutical research supervision, ensuring that students and researchers could never again be exposed to dangerous substances without adequate supervision. His story had become legend at the university, the cleaner who risked everything to do what was right, proving that real heroism comes not from special powers or privileged positions, but from the courage to act when others prefer to ignore. Timothy visited Samuel's office weekly, not just for reports about compensation programs, but because he had found in the older man's presence an emotional stability that his own family had never provided. Together, they continued the fight to ensure that Linda's tragedy would never be repeated. A year and a half after that fateful night, Samuel Jackson stood on Harvard Medical School's stage during a special ceremony, receiving the first Linda Jackson Award for Ethical Integrity in Medical Research. Maya, now 14 years old and one of her class's top students, watched from the front row with tears of pride, while her grandfather spoke to an audience that included researchers, students, and families of illegal drug victims. "My daughter Linda didn't die in vain if her story serves to protect other young people," Samuel said, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "She taught me that sometimes we lose battles, but that doesn't mean we should stop fighting the war." Timothy, sitting next to Maya, smiled seeing how Samuel had found his public voice, transforming personal pain into universal purpose. The Morrison Foundation had distributed over $200 million in compensation to victim families, funded rehabilitation centers in dozens of cities, and established educational programs that kept hundreds of young people away from drugs. Samuel had proven that dignity and determination can defeat any amount of power and money. As Samuel stepped down from the stage after his speech, Maya ran to hug him, whispering, "Mom would be proud." Samuel held his granddaughter against his chest, feeling for the first time in years that Linda could finally rest in peace. The circle had closed. The invisible cleaner had become a visible guardian. The father who had failed to save his daughter had saved hundreds of other families. And the child who had grown up in tragedy's shadow now shone with unlimited possibilities. Timothy approached, no longer the addicted and lost young man Samuel had found that night, but a man committed to redemption through action. "Ready for the next project?" Timothy asked, referring to plans to expand prevention programs to schools across the country. Samuel nodded, looking around the auditorium full of people whose lives had been touched by his courage to do what was right. He had learned that real heroism doesn't happen in grand moments of glory, but in daily choices to remain whole when it would be easier to look the other way, and that sometimes a cleaner can actually change the world.